This week we're studying monopolies, and the most important thing I want you all to take away from this week's chapter reading is how monopolies decide how much they'll produce and how they determine the price. This is going to be something that you'll be tested on, and it's fundamental to understanding the difference between how a firm in perfect competition operates within their market and how a monopolist operates within their market. So I'm going to be basing my graph as best I can off of the demonstration graph from figure 24-6 from our textbook. It's on page 543. So now, like we always have, we have a demand curve. Now this is the demand curve for the entire market, because the monopolist faces the entire market. They're the only ones who are producing. That's our definition of monopoly. So we're going to label this our demand curve. It's downward sloping, as always, when we look at entire market demand. And now I'm going to put in our marginal revenue curve. Now, marginal revenue is basically means marginal. So marginal is the added bit of revenue they get as they increase their quantity. So the marginal revenue is going to be decreasing. So it's also going to be downward sloping, and it's always going to be less than the price demanded. Since a monopolist is the only one providing the whatever good it is, if they were to increase their quantity, they'll have to decrease their price. The demand is downward sloping. So their revenue will also go, their average revenue will go down, and their marginal revenue will go down, because if they want to move from, let's say, this point, quantity 1 to 2, they'll have to decrease the price to here, but they have to do it for everyone, even the people who were buying when it was a higher price. So marginal revenue is always going to be below the demand. Marginal revenue. Because whenever you increase your quantity and then have to decrease your price, you're decreasing it on all the units you would have sold previously. So you cut your prices to sell more, but then you have to cut it for everybody, not just for the people who new people who you want to sell to. You have to cut it for everybody. So you have to recalculate all of your revenue. So it won't just be your new price that you're getting, but you have to change what you would have got if you had stayed at the old price, the higher price, and the old quantity. So that's why it's always going to be lower than demand. So we have this extra curve, this marginal revenue curve. What we have that's similar to before is our marginal cost curve. Now, that's going to be the same. It's going to have that curve shape that we're used to, costs coming down and then coming back up. So I'm going to just try to aim it as best I can with this, but it doesn't have to be precise to show what we're showing. Alright, and then it goes up. So it's our marginal cost. So a monopolist is going to make sure that their marginal cost equals their marginal revenue. That's the point where the quantity, let's just say quantity monopolist, that's how your book labels it. The quantity where the amount of money that they're bringing in, the marginal amount of money that they're bringing in, revenue that they're bringing in, is equal to the extra money that they're spending to produce that last QM good. So anything less than that, and they could be making more money and spending less for that particular good. Anything past that, they'd be spending more money than they would bring in to make that good. So they go right up until that point. A lot of times it's in between whole numbers. So if we're in a situation where you have to pick a whole number, it's a pizza. You're not going to sell some pizza, maybe that's not a good example. If it's a computer, you can't sell someone half a computer. So if you were between two whole numbers, we would always go to the number before that. A firm would never choose to spend more money than they bring in to lose money on making something, so they'd stop with the whole number right before they got to this magic point. The magic point isn't always going to be on a whole number. So keep that in mind if you come across that in an example that you're doing in the homework or on the quiz or on the test. So this is the magic point where they will produce. But because they're not producing where demand equals marginal cost, they don't keep this as the price. They would price it higher. They would price it where the market will bear it. And people at QM at this quantity, it's about 9 in the book. It's a little between 9 and 10. So it is between whole numbers. At this quantity, people are willing to pay this much, which is about, just black, so you don't get lines confused. Which is about 6. Now my numbers aren't going to match up with their numbers. Mine's a little lower than theirs. But the idea is the same. So they're going to price it where the market will bear it, where the demand curve is. So that quantity where it matches up with the demand. Less than that, and there would be a shortage. People would demand it more than would be being supplied. So they would increase the price all the way up to the demand at that quantity. We're going to call this price monopolist. All right. So that's how the monopolist decides how much to produce, and that's how they decide how to price it. The only other thing that you might be asked about is how to determine their profit. So let's just put quickly up here profit and the quick formula for that. Profit simply equals revenue, how much money you bring in, minus cost, how much money you spend to get there. It's easy to confuse revenue and profit. So profit is your net, how much you're netting, how much you're bringing in. Revenue is all the money that you brought in before you take away the money that you spent. So in this case, price times quantity is just our revenue. You're selling this many goods and you're selling them at this price. That's how much money you're bringing in. So you know that this whole area, QM times PM, is the revenue. So this is the revenue. But then the costs are the other part we have to think about. So we would need to know either through a table, if it was given to you in a table format, the average costs, or on a graph, the average costs. In this example on page 543, they show you in the graph the average cost curve. So the average cost curve is going to be, let me just try to get it as close as I can to their picture. It's going to be here. So it doesn't necessarily match up with any one point, but you want to find where that quantity meets the average total cost curve. And that's right here. So we know that they're spending up until this much, about $5. So this is cost for monopolist. We'll call it CM, cost, for that amount of quantity. So all of this is cost. So the profit that we have left, color in blue right here, is just this area. So you'll see that this firm, this monopolist, is making a profit. Now you can imagine that if this whole average cost curve were shifted above the demand and the marginal revenue, which it easily could be, if this good were particularly expensive to make and the demand was relatively low, it could be much higher, and then the monopolist would lose money. Their costs would be higher than their revenue, so they would be making negative profit, or they'd be making a loss. One other way we can write this is, so revenue is simply price times quantity, and then we subtract average total cost at the at that particular quantity times the quantity. That's another way, if you had a table, that you could find the profit if you weren't doing it on a graph. So it's probably worth it to write this down, keep it in your notes that you print out. So when you see a graph like this and they ask you these questions, you'll know how to figure it out. Or if they give you a table, you'll be able to do the same thing with all the numbers that are provided for you.